I'm Lane Baker, and today we're here to talk about 5 tips for drum programming noobs. This is designed for guitar players and bassists to stop using loops and start writing your own grooves. So tip number 1, hit the books. To be able to write effective drum parts, one of the best ways to get in the drummer mindset is to study established grooves and break them apart. Open up your favorite drum software. This is Easy Drummer, but you can do this with Superior Drummer, Get Good Drums, East West, it doesn't matter. All of these software libraries offer a selection of professional grooves as MIDI files. Here, I'm auditioning a selection of grooves that were recorded by Tomas of Meshuggah. Check out the grooves in your library, and when you find one you like, just drag it in. I'll choose this one. You can play around with the grooves, move notes, remove notes, add notes, change the instrument, whatever. Have fun and play. There's just no better learning than doing, so just get stuck in. Another tip is to watch drum videos on YouTube. Just search your favorite drummer, drum cam, or a Song X plus drum playthrough, and you'll find tons of videos that can really illuminate different approaches to the instrument. If you don't have a favorite drummer, I say binge watch Mario from Gojira. He's an absolute legend and a joy to watch. I'll put a couple of choice links down in the description below. Tip number 2, pulse and ride. Before we start writing, let's think a little bit more, and think about pulse and ride. Simply put, the pulse is the beat of the song, the thing that drives it forward. Here it's the snare and the kick drum. The ride's the conductor of the song, the thing that keeps consistent time. In this groove, let's just hear the ride. Pretty simple, it's just counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. The ride is an interesting instrument because we can remove or displace beats from it. And it won't really change the drive or the timing of the song, it'll just make it feel a little more undefined and washy. Here's an example. The pulse is usually your snare and your kick drum. This is what's driving the downbeat, the 1, 2, 3, 4 of the song, which is the natural sound of rock music, as what we call the backbeat, so a heavy snare hit on the 2 and the 4. If we displace the elements of the backbeat, in this case I'm just going to take a snare and I'm going to move it out of the groove a little bit, the entire drive of the song is changed drastically. So if you're displacing the snare, be very careful with it. It can be powerful, but it can also mess the listener up. The kick drum is the other part of the pulse and really drives a lot of the sound of metal. In a lot of other types of rock music, the kick drum is very simple. It just follows the bass or just, sticks to a simple rhythm. In metal, the kick drum's often reinforcing the complex patterns the guitars are playing, as in here. Or by playing a double bass pattern or syncopation that sits under everything else, like classic double bass style, as you can see here. Understanding the ride and the pulse is critical to writing a good groove. Everything outside of that's just decorations, like if you're doing toms or snare work, in between beats, as in the background track you're hearing right now. When you start writing, make sure your pulse and ride work perfectly first before adding anything else. Get the pulse and ride locked in with the guitar and bass, and you're gonna have a good groove. Tip number 3, play in layers. Alright, let's talk about the actual writing of parts now. When you're ready to start programming your parts, a great way to work is to play your parts in layers rather than drawing the notes in. You can always draw and edit in the piano roll, but I find it's quick and intuitive to simply let a section loop and record your parts. If you don't have a MIDI keyboard or drum pad, don't worry. Most every sequencer out there allows you to use a virtual MIDI keyboard with your computer keyboard. It's a little clunky, but it can work and it costs you nothing. For this example, I'll be using my computer keyboard in Logic. So I'm setting a loop and turning on the metronome. I'm going to start off by recording the ride, in this case just an open hi-hat with a crash cymbal starting the phrase. After the ride's recorded, I'll add in the snare on the 2 and the 4, giving us that backbeat we talked about. Then I'll add a really simple kick drum part. I made a mistake on the timing at the end, but it's alright. I'm going to quantize this at 55%. That means that 55% ratio of pulling my notes towards the grid. So it's going to tighten things up a little bit, but keep some of that feel and not make everything robotic like a drum machine. Keep going that way, work in layers, and remember, drummers only have 4 limbs, so please don't have more than 4 drums being hit at one time. It's going to make your part sound fake, and if you give that to a real drummer, they're just going to, throw a drumstick at you, and you don't want that. Tip number 4, give it some life. Edit the velocity and positioning to make things sound more real and lined up with your actual instruments. A lot of beginning drum programmers fall into this trap of everything just sounding robotic and like a machine gun. Usually this is because all of their notes have the same velocity, so the same strength of the hit, and very strict timing, where everything is lined up to the grid. Drummers are awesome and we're a lot of things, but we are not machines by any stretch of the imagination. So when you're writing your drums, even if you use the piano roll, make sure to use varying velocity to add some dynamic interest to the song and avoid the machine gun effect. You also can use this to accent the important beats in a guitar or bass riff and make your groove more complex without adding more notes. By the same token, don't feel the need to have every beat line up and be quantized perfectly. The reason I recommended playing your parts in versus writing them on the piano roll is you'll be able to have a little bit more of that natural feel as your natural human variance comes into play. And tip number 5, our final tip, is to switch up the ride instrument and the subdivisions for a quick variation. If you're writing a song and you want to quickly highlight a new section, like going into the verse to the chorus, or the chorus to a bridge, a great way of doing this is to simply switch up the ride instrument and keep the rest of the groove constant. So you can go from a hi-hat to a ride or a tom to a crash. But by doing this, you're going to create a very different wash and rhythmic intensity, and it's going to give a lot of variety with very little work. You can also change the subdivision of the ride, so going from quarter notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, to eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. That can really change the feel, especially when you drop that down and go from eighths to quarters, and then move it from, say, like a ride to a china. Like, check this out. So that's it, 5 tips to help you start writing your own sick metal drum grooves in software. So let's recap. Tip number 1, study the drums. Tip number 2, understand ride and pulse. Tip number 3, play your parts in layers. Tip number 4, use your quantization and velocity carefully. Tip number 5, switch up the ride for quick stylistic changes. So I hope you found that enjoyable and interesting and educational. If you learned something, awesome. If you didn't, I'm sorry, but thanks for spending some time with me. I'd love a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Any comments or questions, just stick them in the section down below. And if you're feeling extra awesome, I'd love a subscribe. I'm new to making YouTube videos other than just guitar wankery, so any feedback is most appreciated. Thanks, keep it greasy, and stay safe out there.